Hey everyone, we are live and kicking. I am here with Jesus Polar. Now, for those of you that don't know Jesus, I am going to do the intro and all of that first, but I just want to say, we just chatted just for a little bit before we began, and I love this guy's personality already. He's really cool. And not only that, he's in Miami. He's right down here in Florida with the rest of us. And so here's a little bit about Jesus so that you can kind of understand. And then I wanted to talk about what this whole conversation is going to be about, because we already started diving deep into it, right, Jesus? And it was getting pretty exciting. So Jesus Polar is a brand designer with over 10 years in print and digital practices, brand management, but he also has an interest in intuitive user experience. And you guys know that that's my field as well. But he focuses on long-term design strategy and production. So he currently works at a leading, and it's here in Florida, Florida's leading management services organization, or an MSO, that provides cost-effective business solutions so physicians can efficiently and profitably run their practices. Now, I must say this because I thought it was impressive. One of his milestone achievements was creating and launching a comprehensive strategy that was implemented seamlessly. Listen, those of us that know about UX design, seamlessness is like one of the things that you just really strive for. So he did it seamlessly at 230 private medical practices. Everyone, welcome Jesus Polar. Jesus, it's so good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm excited about this conversation.
Same here.
Yeah, man. So, okay, my first question is this. A lot of us have gone to or discovered or explored or just dove right in to the branding or the design space in so many different ways, right? It's just there's so many different ways to do it. For me, I started through copywriting. And then eventually, copywriting is, I want to understand how you're going to use as a client. How will you use my content? So then I explored branding, because if you can brand and construct where the content is being used, then you have a little bit more control. And then I was like, branding is cool, but I want to understand the strategy behind that. So then it just got bigger and bigger. Now you're looking at UX design and strategy and all of that. What was your story? How did you end up not just in branding, but being a brand designer? That's you don't see or hear, at least many people talk about doing both, and especially in a management position. So yeah, just talk about how did you get there?
Well, yeah, and I want to preface with, you're absolutely right. You don't get to hear brand designer because it's usually a brand marketing tends to have ownership of those kind of roles. Okay. And this actually ended up happening once I joined this company. They ended up they needed someone to manage the visual branding of all of our assets. Okay. It wasn't just the production, but now also making sure that our brand guidelines were being adhered to. And I was actually working with a marketing brand manager who was making sure that the messaging was on point. So we were serving both sides of the same coin. And I thought this is actually something I'm truly enjoying. Branding actually had my interest in branding actually had developed about 34 years earlier. Nice. As I ended up joining a company where they had 4 subsidiary startups. Okay. And all 4 of them, one of them had their own creative team, but the other 3 were being run under our one team, and we needed to develop their voice, actually make sure that they were connecting correctly to 3 different types of markets. So we under the leadership of our marketing vice president, we were slowly forming these stories. Okay. And for one of them, which at the beginning I just kept thinking, well, what can you talk about logistic warehousing? Right. Because they're not the most exciting pictures that you'll ever take, and yeah, I mean, granted, later on we thought, well, we can go with more engaging graphics, illustrations, and talking more about the portfolio of what they've been able to acquire and develop over time, and that becomes a huge interest piece for other investors, because it was all investment at the end of the day. Okay. Yeah. But when you're being presented something at face value with like, it's warehouses, figure it out. It's well, yeah. Okay, right. Let's dive in and see who's there. And and they were very passionate people. One venture went into the logistical into chain produce, transporting
Okay.
produce from like Philadelphia all the way down to, or, I'm sorry, not Philadelphia, from the Midwest over to Philadelphia, then over here, because it's there's a trajectory for most foods, and there's people that are very passionate about this. That not just the kind of the safety. There's people in safety standards that are just like going nuts over the new technologies that they're developing to make sure the food is safer. But on another end, it's the people actually driving the logistics for transportation, and they go nuts about this. They have conferences just like every other circle.
Every other industry has it. So when I was in school and I was a custodian for some time, I had no idea that there were custodial, I don't know exactly what it was called. I don't know if it was like custodial engineering, but there were conferences where they had all kinds of vendors, and I'm thinking, this is a thing.
It's a world.
Yeah, it's a whole different world, right?
Yeah.
So how did you fit in, like not even fit in, how are you able to extrapolate logistical warehousing, like the QA that's here, quality assurance here, and the actual logistical trajectories and routes that had to be done, and then the packaging in between? Where did branding fit into all of that? Because you're right, it doesn't seem, quite frankly, you don't really see any commercials, right? I know the branding commercials. So how were you able to become in a sense, an aficionado, right? In meshing the two, branding and designing for a logistical company, because you hit on something that was that you talked about, storytelling. So go ahead and work that besides that.
So, at one point, of course, at the surface level, they were just showing comparison data as far as this is how you get an advantage with us. Mm-hmm. But then over time, they needed to start talking about, well, this is how long we've been around. That this is not also what we stand for. We're trying to provide quality. We're passionate about the kind of service that we can provide. Maybe certain parts will be at a higher cost, but then your benefit is you're getting more. You're getting better quality products with a long-lasting shelf life, which benefits your consumers. So from that point on, it just and going back. We started creating these illustrations versus just taking pictures of the warehouses and saying look at the mapping of how things are going from the minute they're picked in the field to the minute it reaches the supermarket.
Nice.
Look at the timelines, and because again, unfortunately there wasn't so much of a story other than this is where we come from, this is what we're trying to do. So it became more of a mission statement, but then it became more of a show and tell. I would like to say.
I like that.
I think there's just certain times in branding that you can talk about it all day, but people do want to see what you can do. And at the end, from the consumer side, you want to see results.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So you probably have come across this. I'm going to pull it up and try to find it and share it. But let's talk about. So you're not a UX designer, but a lot of what you do does incorporate the process. So kind of work us through, and let's see if I can pull up one example here where we can have the UX design process just like right here. And let's just go ahead and share the screen right quick. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
1 second, Jesus. And let's see. Chrome tab. Okay. So we've seen this process before, right? UX design. And there's so many different ways to do it. Empathize first, define, ideate, prototype, test. And then there's this loop, this continuous loop between testing and ideating, testing and ideating. One of the things you mentioned, right, was instead of just taking pictures, you created illustrations. So it's kind of cool because in a sense, you are kind of developing a new story for an old narrative. I'm trying to work that.
It's just I absolutely get it. And funny enough, the way we were looking at it at that point wasn't like, how do we refresh the story? It's just how do we make this just engaging to begin with? Because if someone shoots, every warehouse looks the same at the end of the day once it's an empty space. Once you fill it in, that it actually has character. So I remember at one point we did have a photo shoot where we were taking pictures of the actual warehouses that were actually filled up with products and saying how engaging it already was. That was on one end, but then to actually talk about then the actual journey of, and again, grabbing the fruit and all the states that I had to travel through, and the entire sanitation process just to reach to the supermarket, and now you're getting your produce like 2 weeks earlier with 2 extra weeks of shelf life. Then that needed. I at the end, we didn't think that it was just going to be achievable by just showing a picture of like someone eating an apple. It needed to show that map. The map was going to tell them this is the journey, this is where you end up, but look at what you save.
Yeah. So walk us through, and it may not be this process, and this is why I do it this way, because if it's not even this, we can go ahead and Google something that's a little bit closer. What pieces, or maybe we can even add some processes of what you kind of went through in order to say, okay, here is how we are going to brand this particular logistics warehouse company and how we're going to tell their story. What did the empathizing and the definition and the ideation phases kind of look like? You already touched on it, but maybe to break it down for those of us who don't know what we do. Like, what do you do for a living? And a lot of it starts with the empathy part, the research. But so see if you can
absolutely, yes. And it's funny because we don't tend to. I think subconsciously we don't know we're already empathizing by trying to learn who we're aiming this to. I mean, my earliest experience that I would say led me to research user experience begun back in print, not even digital, because as we were creating this is from one of my first jobs. They were a banking software company, and a lot of our collateral material were basically stacks of information. It was just print all over the place, and they went basically to conferences as well, and they're trying to tell them, oh, here's packet A with all of the information about our tools and services. Here's packet B talking about our systems. Here's packet C, and here's like flyers 1 through 20. And at that point I thought that each of those, packet A cost $700 to make, because it had all the bells and whistles that you could want out of something that you can touch and say like, oh well, this is extremely high quality. I feel like I'm dealing with a high-end company. But that was the very first piece they gave them, and that was one of the first pieces that ended up in the trash. That's $700 on the trash bin. And I thought, well, there has to be a better way to introduce them to the service, and on the other end also be much more cost effective. And then when they're interested, then we engage them with mid-tier pieces that maybe cost a little bit more, but we know that they're not going to toss that one away right away. They're actually going to read through it, and then the latter pieces but each one can show a certain level of quality. But I remember
how did you, because this is interesting, right? You started in the print world. How was that? How did it translate into you creating a process from understanding everything in print? Because now almost everything now is digital, right? And so it's easily scalable. How was that process for you? And Nikita says that she loved the flow chart here that we showed, with the empathy and the design process. So that being said, how were you able to kind of coalesce your printing expertise into now brand management and design? Because for many people, it can be a huge leap. For some, and I think for you, it's not really a huge leap. It's really just transferring previous knowledge into a different space.
It really did feel like that, because as we were, and to finish that story actually would lead into answering that question. Nice. When I was trying to put together better material, I was condensing some of it, but then I thought I can actually create certain elements that can scale to different mediums. And at that point, we weren't jumping so much into digital. Aside from the software, we were just starting to develop an app, but a lot of the elements there were minimal, because at that point it was much it was owned by the developers. So me as the designer, whatever they requested, I was passing over to them. But I saw, oh, well, here's some elements that do work for digital, but
Okay.
maybe I can pass them over. But what can actually, how can I start creating the sort of elements that can work in every single piece? So it starts creating that continuity and that cohesion between pieces.
Mm,
And after a few
okay.
years, then we wanted to revamp the website. And I thought, oh, well, now I created something scalable that can just literally go from print to here. And
Right.
I didn't know it at the time. It wasn't until I left that job that, looking back, I thought, oh, I did something very brand related. I was
Yeah. Yeah.
putting a lot of elements together and saying, this is our look, this is our tone, this is our feel.
That's so okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Suze, I'm gonna cut in because
Sure.
for the last maybe few months, I have been fascinated with the idea of design systems. Not a lot of people know what design systems are out of our industry and what that looks like, what that means. Would you say, because one of the cliche definitions of a design system, and it's so ironic because I'm going to tell you the definition, but there's so many other definitions, is it's a single source of truth of all of the digital assets, everything that is necessary for the designer and for the developer to be able to create and then to actually implement, to code for any kind of product, particularly digital products, but anything that needs to be done, whether it's the website, whether if it's, an application.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you kind of left, right, that business with a design system where you can say, hold on, wait a minute, these elements, these assets are transferable. So the reason why I want to put that in there is because how important is this idea of the tension that happens between design and developer, or in your case, maybe the designer and the marketer, or the people who don't understand the design or branding process, right? Because design systems are created for people to have a happy medium. There are people who, like us, will design an element, right? And then there are those who code the element. But what happens when there is tension? Like, talk about that, because there is a dynamic here as a brand design manager, or just in general, where you can see those issues.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I would say there is a level of tension when you have a developer, a marketer, and a designer. And I usually try to view it as no one pillar has total ownership of what branding is.
That's a good point.
It's, and it's something that I keep seeing, and it keeps reoccurring, where when I mentioned earlier before we started the live broadcast, how sometimes UX designers tend to say, well, this is our system, this is everything that we own.
Right.
It's almost like we're at the center. And it's not a critique to them. Designers do it too. Marketers do it too. Programmers, developers do it as well. And sometimes I would say a great woman I was working with, she was also the marketing brand manager. She pointed out, when you're working in silos, you ignore the contribution of other people. And branding doesn't belong to one single person. It belongs to all of us. And it's funny because I've heard different interpretations of what design systems are, but they always tend to gear towards, it's digital. And to me, branding, anything that has to do with design, is a very general term. It's never been, granted, we're doing so much more digitally.
Right.
But, and contrast, people used to say, by comparison, certain designers would say, well, print is dead. And I thought, no, because when you're driving, there's a stop sign that needed to be created. That's print. When you're at the supermarket, you're dealing with print products. It's packaging, but it's printed. It's we just had an additional source of content to be viable for us in this day and age. So it's just, branding in general to me has always been collaboration. When I talk, and it's interesting that that you mentioned, we're trying to develop these systems where we can all meet in the middle versus, and I mean, compromise is key, because if I were to design a website, if I don't understand where the developer's coming from and what the limitations might be, creating something, there's going to be conflict. Same thing with, I would say, a marketing strategist would say, well, this is the way we want to position it. Granted, the dynamic will change because they might have already created an idea. I just have to support it. But then somewhere along the way, I can say, you know what? I don't think this part translates well visually. We might want to change the wording. We might want to change the tone.
Yeah.
So, but at that point, it becomes much more exploration. So,
let's
I never seen one above the other.
Because you make a great point. I want to also then share with those who may not know or what we're actually talking about with design systems, what that can kind of look like. So there's this article that I think was from the UX collection, which I really, really, really appreciate. I can't remember the name, but I think it's at the bottom. Audrey Hack, I think is her name. This is what she shares, what a design system can look like. So there are multiple elements where you deal with identity. And so this side is, I would consider the branding side, right? It's not just part of the branding side, colors, fonts, images, sounds, voice, and tone. And you talked about the messaging and the voice that the logistic warehousing company that you were working with, you said, listen, they need a voice. There's a persona that they have to embody. That's part of the brand. Most people just see, colors and fonts or a logo, but it's so much more than that, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You even sound is in there. I mean, if we think, I recently finally got an Echo Dot, and a fellow designer brought up, well, we don't tend to think about voice as an experience,
right?
And then I started messing around with, and I don't want to say the name out loud because then it's going to start, running a query, but. It's very close by, but as soon as I start asking something, I notice that it's the choice of words and how it tries to condense its sentences. That's design. That's design in itself. So I really like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll send you the article in our private chat here when I get a chance, because it really opened my mind to understanding all of the components before we get to that middle part. I think we all love to jump to the middle part, components and patterns. That's like the buttons and the page layouts and all of these things, but it's
tactile.
Yeah. So when she brings up principles, which deals with brand values, purpose, objectives, vision, mission, that's brand stuff, right? And then the best practices too, accessibility. What is the UX of this thing? The trainings that might be necessary. So then she's like, you take all of this documentation and research, because that's all it is right now, right? For those of you that still have no idea what we do, a lot of us that live in the brand and design realm, we're at the top. we spend a lot of time in the identity principles and best practices before we jump down into putting all of that into what people in the not normal people, but people typically will say, what's the deliverable? Those at the top can be deliverables, but this is where it becomes fully manifested for those who aren't really in that world to say, oh, now I see it. Now I see how the web page is supposed to look and how the color is. Yeah.
No, that definitely. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. So at the very end here, and this is where she puts underneath, where it's the designer and the developer come together. Okay, so let's just take a break here for a second, Jesus, because I think you might be able to speak to this idea of, just because as a designer, you may say this is the color green that needs to be put on this particular page, the developer still needs to figure out the code to get that exact green color. I think people kind of miss that, right? Where you can have a beautiful photo or whatever it is, but there's somebody on the other side that actually has to code it in. So we can kind of draw it out, so to speak, or prototype it, but they have to say, okay, the animation is cute, but I have to put some JavaScript in there to actually make it a reality.
Oh yeah, of course. I think at that point, and again, you have to take a moment to learn what it takes for the other person to realize their goals, to be able to meet, to be able to complete their project. So I mean, a lot of us already know, if I want to send something to a developer, it has to be under X resolution, something to DPI maybe, unless we want to do high definition, whatever. But then I have to provide all of these, not just provide the assets, but then I have to provide referential information so they're able to grab it. But a lot of people sometimes tend to forget that. And it's like, oh, well, they'll figure it out. It's like, no, because they might just think, well, I see a blue I'll code into whatever I think that representation of what this blue might be. So it's
yeah,
it
and
has
that's where
to
the
be very
confusion is.
collaborative. You have to
Yeah,
you're all supporting each other. I mean, at the
absolutely.
end, it's you're trying to all put a program together. I'm sorry, a product together.
Yep.
You can't build a house with just the plumber going like, well, I laid out the pipe, so you build around that.
Right. And so you mentioned something very important, because at the bottom here, she has these two different things. You have the functional documentation. This is how it's supposed to work. And then you have the technical documentation. This is like where the developers can actually see what it all is mapped out to. Okay. So for those who might be kind of new to this, and I still am too, there are platforms that are out there, like Envision has their DSM, which is a design system manager. There's Frontify, which is another one, which takes a lot of brand management. It takes a brand management approach.
Yeah.
There's so many. I think Figma is kind of teetering on that side a little bit. There are a few. I probably skipped a whole bunch of different kinds, but there are a few that are out there where you can actually have the actual green palette, and the developer looks at it and says, "Oh." He clicks on it, the code pops up, and then he can like pull it over. So there, when you talk about collaboration, Jesus, like you are so right. I think from this talk, the biggest thing that I've gotten so far, which I didn't really think about until you were mentioning it, is branding is more than just, and we talked about this before, stories, expectations, relationships, memories that causes people to buy your product. It's a collaboration for the other side. This is not just for the customer. It's for the people who actually have to build a brand. They have to come together.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Together. You mentioned, and I love the fact you call it the red mage, and so you might have to break that down for those of us that don't know what that is. But what is this idea of companies, people, clients, even looking for what we call the unicorn? It's the person who is the UI and the UX designer. They're the coder, and they're the print designer. Like they're this beautiful package. Talk about that.
Yeah. So every now and then, I run into maybe a job post, and it'll say, "Hey, we want a graphic designer, someone with marketing experience. They can do animations. They can also code a website." And they have a strong emphasis in typography, color, color theory. But then we also might need a certain kind of expertise with branding and social media, and then videography, and then photography. And it's like I would draw it up to just a lack of education on what our field can actually do, and because. Yeah, it's easy to say that, there's people that are always going to try to cram as much as they can into one position.
Yeah.
But it's also a lack of understanding into what is a designer really, what is a brand designer, what is a UX designer, what is a marketer. I mean, I once worked at a place that I was a designer, but they saw me on a computer and they thought I was the IT guy. So, and it was just that they had no way of knowing, but I mean, they actually approached me and said, like, "Hey, I have a problem," and I thought it was design related. Because at the time we were also building a lot of presentations, so I thought, oh, maybe it's with PowerPoint, and we were trying to get really fancy, and maybe they changed something. I go, I can't connect to the internet, and I'm like
this.
Well, I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
But then the thing is, they this man looked at me and he went, "Well, what do you do?" And once I explained it, then the next time I was called, I was like, "Hey, I have something that I want to sign."
Yeah.
But then I would say recently, in the past year, I did have my own personal challenge where working with marketing team where they were just used to working by themselves. They all creative design work was outsourced. I became one of the first internal designers, and I noticed that a lot of the culture was they would consult amongst themselves about creative output. Not their fault,
right?
Because you only know what you know, and at that point, they basically thought, well, I have to start pushing, or not just introducing myself as a designer, but start to advocate into this is what I can actually do. I can actually research these things for you. I can give my
Yeah.
better, I can give recommendations. I can save 18 hours of research where you guys are just going to go have a back and forth, because this isn't something that you don't necessarily have to bother yourselves with, but I can give you a better perspective into what can actually, what can be a more productive venue.
Yeah.
And over the last year, now we're at a stage where, now I'm within these groups, actually, being consulted, and then now it feels like that brand manager position is much more influential versus just the upkeep of the brand. Well,
it's
now,
respected.
now it's also there's an educational portion, which is imperative. Otherwise, because I mean, if we're talking about brand management in general, you can try. I mean, as a designer, you can stick to the brand guidelines all you want, but if no one else does it, then it's just wasted effort. So you and that's something that I think has to go back to a general sense. You have to let people be aware of what is it that you bring to the table, so they understand how it how it works with them in relation, and that how it's going to develop a dynamic and a work relationship. It's that includes the marketer, the UX designer, your programmer, your business development strategist. They all, again, it's all one group. It's not, it'll never, unless you're talking about maybe a creative agency where, of course, your creatives are at the core. But when you're talking about, working in-house for a company, every single team is of equal value, because what's at the core is the company itself.
Right. So you know what? You hit on a few things which I think is so important to highlight. You asked the person asked you the question, what do you do? I'm going to ask you that question. And now that you've had years of experience, because listen, it's hard, it's so hard. It's hard. The best way for me to explain UX design, I always use this example about, well, I'll tell you after you share yours, but I use such a practical example because people don't get it, and it's not their fault.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not. Sometimes sarcastically, I just tell people I make things pretty, but that's because I mean, I should probably stop doing it, because then it'll blow back on my face. But but over time, it's just. I mean, sometimes, and that's probably the problem that I have. I just can't sum it up in one sentence. I have, and I don't want to bore them to death.
Yeah. So this is what I do. So when they ask me UX design, like, what is that? What do you do? So I first say what it is, and then I give them an example. And I hate that I have to do that until I work better at it. But but I'm like, so I help people. Because we have the feasibility, desirability, functionality. So I try to use those things, right? So I say I create things or design things to help people use things that they actually want in an easier way. Now that but then they're like, in what capacity? So then I'm like, okay, have you ever been to a Starbucks? Because this happens to me all the time. I don't know if you've been to that Starbucks in Aventura in like 192nd. It's like next to.
I know which one you're talking about, but yeah.
Yes, on Biscayne. So every time I go there, I mean, now there's muscle memory, and you remember. But the first time that I went there, first few times, the storefront is beautiful, right? It's aesthetically pleasing, it's symmetrical, but you don't know whether you should push or pull the doors. So people are, and it's funny because now that you know the difference, you actually look to see if anybody makes the same mistake that you do. And the majority kind of just run right into it because they don't realize there is no push or pull signage that's telling you what to do. And so they're like, have you ever has that ever happened to you where you push instead of pulling? Like, yeah, I'm like, good. That's where we come in. We help the person before they make the door figure out what should the door actually, how should it be designed? Should signage work, or should it just be designed differently? That's what they do. That's what we do. And they're like, oh, I'm like, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I would like to bring up, that's actually, I mean, and eerily enough, that's actually something that's also mentioned. I'm not sure if you ever read The Design of Everyday Things. By Don Norman.
I'm so embarrassed that there's so many, like, especially Don Norman books that I should be reading right now, but I have not.
Trust me, I'm not going to judge. I'm probably in chapter 2 after a year. So, but funny enough, the very first chapter talks about the experience of a door. And
Get out of here.
I'm not joking. I'm not joking. And
Wow.
it talks about what is it that the door yields when you don't have a sign, or when you do, and when you have a handle.
Wow.
I mean, because a lot of our communication tends to be nonverbal, and sometimes we're just looking for visual cues. I mean, if I see if I see an actual handle, protruding, I'm thinking I can pull, because I'm trying to go by logic in a split second.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I agree. And so I think that's where we are, where we help to think about those things that companies don't. They're thinking so much about the product and the features of the product. We're like, hold on, wait a minute. Features are great, but what do the people actually want? And they start to realize the majority of the features, many times, that they think is necessary are really just bells and whistles. I always go back to how Craigslist, if you go to Craigslist.com right now, the UI, like just from you and me, like the UI is just like, or Reddit, like it's not that attractive, but it
works.
Functional.
It works. Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm so sorry I cut you off.
No, you're good. I was just gonna say Craigslist is like still in the top 50 websites of the world still.
Yeah. I mean, I can still go through it because I know exactly what the hurricane entails, because it's informational. And when you're dealing with so much data, you can't, I mean, you have to draw a fine line between form and function. And in this particular instance, you do have to go more towards function. Otherwise, because if it doesn't function the way it's supposed to, I mean, it's like you're buying a brand jacket. Sure, it'll say Armani on it, but if it's not fitting the right way, if it's not giving you the certain kind of mobility, if it's not covering you, if it's not keeping you warm, then you just have a nice looking jacket, but the day it starts raining, or if you're up in the north, it's snowing, or it's a little bit colder, you're thinking, well, I could grab the jacket, but this one keeps me warm. This other one that cost me like 1/8 of the price. So
wow, yeah.
But it's interesting because we make those decisions daily. If I'm about to cook, sure, I bought the nice looking spatula, but I'm always gonna grab the cheap green one because somehow it just bends the right way exactly to what I need to. There's so many things that we don't register as users, as consumers. And they're intrinsic, and they're not hidden. We just take it for granted, and we're trying to skip to what's catching my eye.
You know what? So you mentioned, man, it's great. Actually, we just got a new spatula this week or last week, and it's different.
That too. Everything. Everything's an experience. I mean, I would say to a larger degree, when you buy a new car, you've been used to driving your old car for God knows how many years. You know how it starts. You know how you have to accelerate. But with the new one, you're going to always notice there's going to be an adjustment period. And I think that's universal for almost everything. Me, as I've been playing video games since I was a kid, and every game, every new one, even if it's a repeat title of a previous one, something might change, or everything has an adjustment period. And I would say also games are very representational of user experience because
absolutely.
But in a way that also challenges the notion that everything should be more accessible, because they believe in we need to provide you a challenge. Because because once you complete a challenge, then you have a satisfaction. That also goes back to what Don Norman was saying. When something has to yield a certain a certain outcome, and once you do it, you kind of hit a high. You kind of go, oh. You pull in the door open.
Right.
What did that yield? Access into Starbucks.
Right.
And then you're interacting with $1 million things. So everything has something in there that you just have to. While it should be accessible, it has to be easy for you to identify. There's still that little bit of a challenge when you go like, oh, I made it work. That's it. I mastered this, or I know how to use it. And even back to the car, once you get used to it, it's like, oh, I know how to start it. I know how to accelerate just right and decelerate.
This is good because so two things. I think of when you talk about the gaming world, Among Us. Among Us is a very simple game, but the challenge is what has made it such I don't know, I wouldn't use the word viral, but it's very popular now. Very popular.
I was playing it just last night.
Yes.
I was just playing it last night.
Yeah. And the graphics are nothing to be desired of. Really, it's simple, but it's the challenge like you're talking about. So okay.
It's psychological.
Right. Very much so. I haven't played it yet. But yes, you're right. Yeah, you should probably
and I would like to say the challenge is other people.
Yes. Okay,
it's not so much the game, it's each other.
Stick with this idea of it being other people. How do you then, as a brand design manager, or a brand designer, right? How do you take the person? You mentioned the Armani coat, which is totally dysfunctional. It doesn't work at all. It doesn't keep you warm, but the brand is on it. And a lot of people, I used to live in New York City, a lot of people will wear some very unfunctional pieces of apparel, but because they know the brand is there, they would rather go cold, but they know that it looks good.
Yeah.
Right. So as a brand designer, right, how do you help people to make the transition to something new, or maybe even something that's not as functional? I'm pretty sure you've been in teams in the past, right, where you say to yourself, man, this isn't really, it's not where it should be. But then as the brand side of the, of your design role, you have to sell that thing still, right? How do you
of course.
How do you work with that? I think that's
and funny enough, I was going to mention, I think that's also true of people here in Miami. We tend to wear brand all the time. I mean,
I don't want to call us out, but yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also true of so many other places. But that's just kind of how these brands have, over time have been able to build that kind of trust and loyalty. I would say.
So it's not delusion, it's trust. Isn't that crazy? Could there be a difference between somebody trusting in a brand and just being totally delusional, as if the brand is going to help them with something?
Well, I mean, it kind of happens, not to knock them down, but I mean, Apple kind of has that kind of like loyalty, already built in, because they believe. I mean, and again, they do provide a wonderful experience with all of the devices, but each year they kind of take something out, but you still walk in with a lot of, a lot of earnest hope that this is going to improve your life. Because at the end, I think as consumers, that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to make things just a little bit easier each time. So when we're talking about, branding, I think it's also, and how do we start building a trust? It's by trying to build equity. And that is kind of where I believe it's not just up to the brand designer. This is also now more than likely the marketing team has to enter and start providing more of a sales strategy. But ultimately, I do believe when you build something of quality, people will realize it and people will acknowledge it. It will click. And over time, and that's the other thing, you have to give things time to develop. I mean, sure, we have things that have become an overnight success, but they're almost, I mean, and
it's rare.
They work wonderfully, but sometimes it just happened to be very convenient. It's all, almost like a lottery sometimes. I mean, Zoom coming into the picture at the beginning of the pandemic, people were already using it because it was a free service.
Exactly.
Suddenly, because of word of mouth, there were, a lot of offices that, a lot of companies that weren't really thinking about, how do we communicate remotely, heard either the kids or, maybe younger coworkers mention Zoom because it was already easy to use and, just so much more accessible.
Simplicity always wins.
It spread like wildfire. However, one of the drawbacks was this was not a secure venue to have, secure meetings. But of course they started to patch that up. But again, I'm trying to think of a good example. When I used to build my own computers. Now, of course, that required me to do my own consumer research.
Okay.
But I could tell that there were a lot of times that I would look at an Asus motherboard or anything by HP. And of course, because in the back of my mind, I thought, well, it worked the last time.
Right. Okay.
And I trust it.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't really be, I mean, it becomes a consumer point. And I mean, despite the fact that I'm in branding, I should be able to see past that. But branding is emotional.
It is. It is. So you're, oh man, wow. That's why it's such an ethereal, intangible, sometimes an abstract concept to ask the question, which I think this is probably how we're going to maybe end it. Maybe we'll see, depending on how you answer this, which is, as a brand designer, what do you do? How would you answer that question now?
So as a brand designer, I would say I try to put together not just the story, but the emotional connection I'm trying to build between the product or service to a consumer, or maybe to another business. I'm trying to establish a personality and a tone by which it can best, represent what what the company is trying to do, and find its own voice. It's I would maybe make it akin to, a child being born. It's not until you're a teenager that you start exploring options, but it's not until your 20s, late 20s, early 30s that you finally start establishing a voice. That in itself, I mean, it's, of course, you're trying to accelerate all that in under a year for a company or a product, but you're developing basically an entity for. Hopefully that explains it. But again, it's without breaking, grabbing this whiteboard and then having to go into like the 20 different aspects of it. But,
hey, we can do a little, we can sketch out a little something.
No, yeah, we could.
Okay, let me get this comment. So Nikita says all the companies with great brands have studied the psychology of emotion, and
that's very true.
I would agree. They even just have departments where that's all they do, and you just tap into that particular department. And I think that would be your department. I think that I would be on your side. Here's what we're gonna do. Okay, so I'm going to pull up. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's pull up the window here, and I'm going to ask. Well, I'm just going to put it at the top here. Brand, and by the way, my handwriting is horrendous, so you're just gonna have to.
No, you're totally fine.
Something about the fact that we can do aesthetics, but man, typography or calligraphy is like not our thing. So I'm going to. So I can't see you at this moment, but because I'm on this side, I don't have a double screen set up just yet. We're working on that. So as you're talking and breaking this down, I'm just gonna sketch out just a little bit what it all entails and how it all fits together. So you definitely did talk about emotion. That was one key. I'm not sure
if emotion can also be equated to the tone of what we're trying to establish. Of course, it's a consistent visual representation.
And
it is, and this is in collaboration with, I would say, marketing strategist, but the actual messaging that you're trying to establish for the brand.
Oh, okay. So let me actually put that instead. Messaging, because people should understand too that and sometimes I have to be reminded that the messaging is different from the tone. Messaging is,
we still read. We still need to. We can land some of the world's greatest visuals, but sometimes our word will capture, exactly what it needs to convey. Again, Apple just sometimes nails it with their campaigns because they know exactly what to tell their consumers.
Right.
In contrast to, say, Microsoft, which, of course, Microsoft's target is much more about like, hey, it's about efficiency. It's about productivity. Well, the other one says, hey, you're having fun.
Yeah. So let's do this. Let's now take all of this. And I know that there are more, but because you've
Oh
been
yeah.
kind of put on the spot, this is like not this is not the totality, but we're gonna say that let's say that this is like a funnel. So you're putting all of this down, and what
I
does
would
it
I would say
all
all of this could result in your position,
okay, great.
and that can either be including the messaging, but also just the position of your brand, and it's and actually developing the identity.
Okay. So brand's positioning, the identity. And then if we take these two pieces, and of course, once again, there are definitely multiple pieces as well that are connected here. What then would you consider a deliverable? Now we are strategists, so we know that we can charge a client, and we know this, right? 10, 20, $30,000 just for this alone.
Yeah.
Just for a report that says this is what you are. Go into the world and do it. And then they would have to come back and say, well, I don't know how to do.
Well,
We'll show you.
at that point, we're talking about your campaigns, whether they're digital, maybe even print. We're talking about how we're going to your strategy, which could be extended towards social media. There's also going to be the development of all of these assets to and how it's going to finally be established into, hey, this is what it actually looks like now.
Nice.
Because going back to one of the last video you did on branding, I would like to just kind of drop him in there, but Stephen Gates, I think he's
okay.
He has a podcast called The Crazy Ones, and he also was a speaker at Adobe Max a few years ago. I think when I saw him, it was in Vegas, and he was running an entire course on how to brand yourself. But he wasn't positioning a formula. He just posed a number of questions.
Gotcha.
Because, of course, the intent is, branding yourself is probably one of the most difficult things you're ever going to do. It's so easy to look at something or someone else and say, well, this is who you are, because we can be, it's easy to be a lot more even objective, but, critical of but we know what we're aiming towards when we're asking ourselves, who am I? How am I different from other people, without getting into some very existential questions? Because I remember at one point he even asked certain things as far as, if you could think of yourself as an archetype, who would you be? And not one person is one thing. If you are, more power to you.
So I did that. I did that before. I actually have I don't have it. It's probably like with an arm's length, but there's so many different products that have that. And I narrowed it down to two for me: the architect and the alchemist. So even for me, I couldn't just decide between the person who enjoys solving problems through systems and blueprints, the architect, and then the alchemist, who is the one that loves to take formulas or blending things together, ideas, whatever it is, services, and coming up with a magic elixir that solves the problem. But the issue, the commonality is they both solve issues. It's just in different ways, so you're absolutely right about that. We're very complex when it comes to even trying to brand ourselves.
I remember for myself, I remember thinking it was somewhere along the lines of, for example, architect, but also I saw myself as the disruptor, because I like tearing things apart, because I like understanding how they function, including people. I like deconstructing, but I had to be aware that, that kind of pisses people off sometimes when you're like rummaging through everything and they're like, this is what makes you tick.
Right.
Let's think it over.
And their product or whatever it is, and just like, but I spent so much time.
If someone were to do it to me, I'd just probably sit there in the corner, like, one tear rolling down my eye, going like, but that was everything I had. But it's But I remember some of those other questions also went into, how if how is my brand going to relate to other people? How, who's my target consumer? And I thought, I don't know who my target consumer is, because I mean, I remember at one point saying, what are your weaknesses? Who are you really? And then you have to be very honest. But I think those questions still translate when you're building something, to saying, what makes us weak? What makes us strong?
Absolutely.
And sometimes a lot of teams don't want to have that conversation. Most of us don't want to have the conversation.
So I have a few friends who are experts in understanding like the DISC assessment, and it really boils down to where Nikita was talking about the psychology of emotion. There's also just this paradigm of understanding personalities, personality types, and how depending on who you are, I guess, how you are prone to react in particular situations, especially in the workplace, would determine who you should be meshing together with and how the team should be built. And anyway, listen, Jesus, man, it's almost been an hour. This is great. Okay. We will have to do this. We will definitely have to do this again.
Absolutely.
For those of you that might just came in. So we talked about it. We've been picking Jesus's brain about just brand design, what branding is, what design is, what does that look like in the professional setting? What is the core root? And a lot of what we talked about today, it deals with emotion. It deals with understanding the messaging, the persona, not just of the client, but the team has to do that work too. If they don't understand it, if we don't collaborate together to build the brand internally, externally, it is going to be a hot mess, and it will not sell. So, Jesus, man, I really want to thank you for just.
It was my pleasure, and thank you for allowing me to join in.
Hey, no problem, man. We will do this again. Because
absolutely.
I love how you think, and so we didn't get to the whiteboard behind you because that you got some cool stuff there. So we gotta talk about that one time, man.
All right, no problem. Hopefully by then it'll be a little bit more better developed.
Yeah,
because it's been like this for maybe a month, and every time I look at it, I'm thinking,
you'll get back to it.
It's
cool.
I'll solve it. So
all right, all right, man. Well, thanks again for just being a part of this conversation, man. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Have a great day.